Welcome to the guide, Exile. If you're watching this build guide after patch 3.9 Metamorph League and the title's patch number has been advanced, be sure to check the description, written guide, and pinned comments if there have been any updates on the build for its current viability. Some items, mechanics, or skill selections may change in between patches, thus the build can differ from the video. If the patch number does not match the current patch, the build has not been updated accordingly. Okay, so I know I said the last build was expensive. Well, this one sort of eclipses that. During the last few weeks, I was unsure of the build that I wanted to play. I started a Mana Storm Wanding Hierophant, but that build crashed and burned, so I just spent a week farming endgame on the Cock Guardian. I ended up with a lot of currency in my stash and decided I should just go big on a build. So as I was thinking about it, my chat and my friend kept pushing me towards using the new Saviour sword in a build. The Saviour is an average base damage sword that has a special modifier on it. Triggers level 20 Reflection when equipped. A Reflection is a minion that is summoned upon you dealing a critical strike with the Saviour sword. The minion uses a copy of your gear and obtains stats dynamically from you, meaning that it can benefit from Flask buffs. It will then attack with the skill that you dealt a critical strike with. You can have 2 of these reflections active at a time, and they deal 50% of your damage. So in essence, they can double your damage as long as their AI works right and they attack the right target. Since I didn't really feel like doing something melee, I thought it would be neat to revisit Spectral Throw, as I hadn't used that skill since patch 3.0 with the Cold Conversion Raider, and have been craving its playstyle the last few leagues, especially after seeing Wolfio play with it on a champion with a similar setup. So this time, I figured instead of Elemental Spectral Throw, I'd go for a pure physical Spectral Throw utilizing Impales to scale my damage even further. As such, the clear choice was to go with a champion, to get the most out of my Impales, and then yada yada yada, after investing 90 plus exalts, it straight up murders bosses. So yeah, this build is pretty much more expensive than anything I've really made a guide on before, but as with the last build, I am sure that there are many people that would like to follow it, use it for inspiration, or just see how it works with all this investment. So let's get straight into the unethical damage that this build possesses. The operation of this build is really quite straightforward. The main skill of choice is Spectral Throw. We go into maps and we toss out millions of Spectral Throws into all of the enemies. I chose to scale its damage with pure physical damage, impales, and critical strikes. On top of this, I also threw on a Pride Aura, Flesh and Stone, Precision, and Dread Banner, as well as a super buffed up Herald of Purity. Man, it's like we're another Aura bot. I chose to improve Herald of Purity by means of a Circle of Guilt with both damage modifiers on it, as well as using an Empower to further push the base physical damage we get from it. Beyond our core buffs, I also grabbed a pair of boots with Tailwind on critical strike to increase our attack speed alongside our Ancestral Protector and Blood Rage. Luckily for us, we can gear in such a way that we don't need to worry about the mana cost of Spectral Throw, as we can effectively make it free. This is crucial since Spectral Throw can get expensive, and when you are attacking fast, it can cost more mana than you can recover. I also grabbed a Watcher's Eye with +2 Impales with Pride to get even more physical base damage and Impale stacks on our enemies. For our burst damage, we of course have overpowered flasks such as Cinder Swallow with critical strike chance, and a Bottled Faith for more critical strike chance, as well as a Vol Spectral Throw. I also made sure I did a fair amount of defensive setup, so we're not just a piece of paper. We get blind from our Paradoxica weapon, and as a champion we go for full uptime on our Fortify, which also provides stun immunity and a good chunk of base armor via Unstoppable Hero. Speaking of armor, I chose to go for Iron Reflexes in order to scale our evasion sources from Molten Shell, of which we get around 20,000 armor. We also get Soul of Steel from the passive tree for +1 to maximum elemental resistances. And from our auras, we run Sand Stance for Flesh and Stone to take 11% less damage from enemies while we're mapping. And beyond this, if we do get hit, we have Life Leech from Blood Rage. Overall, we do have a fair few layers, but most of our investments are going towards damage. That being said, I haven't had too many deaths considering, and I've actually found the build to be quite balanced. Now for bosses with Spectral Throw, we want to stand just far enough away from them such that the end of the Spectral Throw arc ends inside or just behind of the enemy. This will allow the projectile to hit multiple times as it slows down and begins to turn back. In fact, up to 3 times per second. In general, with our projectile speed and slower projectile support, you want to stand with the enemy just in the edge of your Blood Stance Flesh and Stone. If done right, you and your reflections will all be hitting the enemy 3 times more than usual. The path of building is included within the written script and description. I chose to go with the champion since I wanted to focus on scaling Impales on top of going pure physical damage. The champion provides some strong benefits to Impale, along with defense and utility within. Master of Metal. This is the node that really makes the build, as it not only gives us more Impale stacks, but a hefty amount of physical damage for each Impale stack that exists on the enemy. Unstoppable Hero. Stun immunity, 2000 base armor after iron reflexes, and some attack speed. Fortitude. Giving us permanent fortify. This is great for consistent uptime of one of our main layers of defense, along with making sure that we always get the bonuses from Unstoppable Hero. Inspirational. Free banner reservation as well as aura effectiveness. We could possibly go with more damage from the other nodes within Champion, but I really felt it was wiser to have some defenses and utility. Here's the final passive tree. In this tree we pick up a few keystones. Point Blank is great for improving the first half of Spectral Throw's arc damage so that we get a strong first hit and a weaker hit on the way back. This is great for map clearing or standing up on bosses. Iron Reflexes for the aforementioned transformation of evasion to armor for Molten Shell. And finally Iron Grip to transform all of our melee strength physical damage scaling into projectile scaling for our Spectral Throw. Other than this, we path as efficiently as possible to grab all of the valuable Impale, Sword, Critical Strike, Projectile, and Life nodes. I do not take Forceful Skewering since we have a 100% chance to Impale already, and the value of those nodes otherwise isn't that strong. The Lethal Pride I place below the Duelist also provides some very strong stats from the picked up nodes, as seen in the listing. For Bandits, we will want to help Alira. For Pantheons, I chose to use Soul of Arakali as our major for reducing chaos damage over time, and for minor, I chose Soul of Shikari for very similar reasons. In my setup, I made use of Awakened Brutality and Visage Projectiles for the damage boost, as we totally need more damage. Ensure Flesh and Stone is in Blood Stance when bossing for extra single target damage. You can choose what level you want your threshold for damage to trigger your Molten Shell. I chose level 10. So yeah, the gearing for this build is going to be quite expensive. I'm sure you can start on a simple budget with some decent rare foils or unique swords along with some rare gear and move your way up to what I have showcased here. I just haven't really tested that or planned it since I wanted to just go all in on this build right away. I crafted a rare helmet with jagged and pristine fossils to acquire the nearby enemies take 9% increased physical damage along with some life rolls. Since I was crafting my own helmet, I did it on an enchanted base with 30% reduced Spectral Throw projectile deceleration. This enchantment is excellent for keeping our Spectral Throws at the end of their arc for a longer period of time, meaning that they will hit the target more times per throw. For the chest, I decided to go with an Elder base that had socketed attacks have minus 15 to total mana cost, and attacks also have percentage increased critical strike chance. The minus mana cost is crucial to bringing the cost of our Spectral Throw down to 0, so then we can reserve all of our mana. Alongside this, life and percentage increased maximum life are great affixes to look for. Since the introduction of Cyrus, we now have these great unique gloves that can be corrupted numerous times, resulting in some strong multi-implicit options. Since the gloves are quite common, it's fairly easy to find many different combinations of implicits for a fair price. I was able to get a pair with curse enemies with vulnerability on hit, and attacks have +2 critical strike chance. Of course, if you can find it or afford it, getting +2 levels of socketed AoE gems is great to further improve our auras. The most important stats we're looking for on boots is you have Tailwind if you have dealt a critical strike recently, and life. If you can find it or afford it, getting percentage chance to gain elusive on critical strike is another great modifier to fit in here. After these modifiers, resistance and movement speed are great affixes to get. The belt is where we can fill in many of our missing resistances, attributes, and life. If you can also fit in damage here, excellent. Remember that strength is technically life and damage for us due to Iron Grip. Here's where finding the gear can be a little bit tricky. Between our amulet and ring, we will need to try and fill out the rest of our resistances, attributes, as well as being able to craft on prefix of non-channeling skills have -9 to total mana cost. This will completely negate the cost of our Spectral Throw combined with our chest and a jewel. For the amulet, be sure to look for one with life, attributes, and damage, and an open prefix to craft on. The amulet could already be crafted as well, as long as the modifier that is crafted isn't one that you were searching for. I Exalt slammed my amulet and got tier 1 accuracy, however, tier 1 accuracy, or accuracy in general on an amulet, is not needed. I anointed my amulet with Assassination as it is the highest damage single node that we can get in the tree. For our rare ring, just like the amulet, we will want to prioritize an open prefix to craft the non-channeling skills have -9 to total mana cost. And again, looking for life, resistances, and attributes next to that, before we look for damage modifiers. I know, heresy, we just want more damage. The unique ring, much like the previous few builds, is one of the synthesized Herald rings. This one increases the buff effect of Herald of Purity, as well as a percentage increased physical damage to us while affected by Herald of Purity. The combination of these stats is incredibly powerful, providing us around 25% more damage, and as such is also fairly expensive. Be sure to look out for decent implicits on these if possible, and if you can't afford both modifiers together, the buff effect is the stronger affix to look for. The weapons for this build are the current staples of the melee space, a Paradoxica and a Saviour. The Paradoxica is incredibly strong in this setup due to how much flat physical damage we are acquiring from Master of Metal. All of this flat damage makes up for the lack of flat damage on the weapon, and then is doubled due to the affix on it. Ideally, you will want to get a Paradoxica with percentage increased physical damage with the blind on hit, as well as attack speed. These modifiers can roll higher than what I have here, but will of course be much more expensive than what I paid for mine. To reach the equivalent damage with a rare foil in place of a Paradoxica, it must be at or above 500 physical damage per second with a critical strike roll on it, which is much more expensive than the Paradoxica shown here. Now make sure that this weapon is in your main hand for the double damage modifier to work correctly on you and your reflections from the Saviour. The Saviour is a new weapon specifically from Cyrus, which provides the 2 reflections that mimic the skill you dealt a critical strike with. This is what makes the build really take off with projectile spam and overwhelming damage. The generated reflections use Spectral Throw quite well, generally positioning targets right at the end of the arc due to their AI attacking as soon as targets are in range. They also completely cover the screen in projectile spam, making your monitor just light up. Here are the flasks for the build. A Dying Sun. I use this flask for clearing as it adds more projectiles to our Spectral Throw. Cinder Swallow. This is a good flask for sustained speed and a crafted modifier, of which I chose to get one with critical strike chance during flask effect for more damage. Bottled Faith. This is of course a very expensive flask, but in the case of this build it adds a solid amount of burst damage, and it is not necessarily required by any means, but I just wanted to spend more money, and that's it. And the last 2 flasks are of course a Diamond Flask and a Life Flask. Now if you're doing a curse map or Cyrus, I generally drop the Dying Sun for a utility flask with curse removal, or I get another Life Flask. The extra Life Flask with Ryslotha Pantheon is great for sustain during Cyrus Storm phases as we don't have a lot of passive regeneration, and the Dying Sun doesn't add any damage to our skill for single target. I'll show example jewels used in the build within the video and leave their affix priority in the written guide. I use 3 unique jewels in the build. The first is a Tempered Flesh, which is placed in the jewel socket to the left of the Marauder. In this location, due to our pathing, this jewel grants 56% critical strike multiplier. That's a pretty big amount of multiplier and, respectively, damage for us, since we are limited on sources of multiplier in our weapon and skill setup for jewels. You can also get the upgraded version of this jewel for an additional 3% physical reduction. The second is a Lethal Pride that is placed in the jewel socket beneath the Duelist. Here we get 6 notables within its radius and many travel and minor nodes. I divined one a few times and ended up landing on a pretty solid one that provides 5% chance to deal double damage, 10% chance to intimidate on hit for 4 seconds, 1% life regeneration, and 82 total strength. These stats are pretty great, but don't make or break the build, and if you cannot get similar ones, that's fine. A good rare jewel can be competitive here too, depending on what rolls you get. The third jewel is a Watcher's Eye with Impales you inflict last 2 additional hits while using Pride. This is a very big damage bump for us since we not only get 2 more Impale hits on the enemy, but 2 extra stacks of Master of Metal. This modifier is very expensive and the build certainly works without it, but again, I'm just spending money and going for as much damage as possible. For the remaining jewel socket, I got a rare jewel with attack speed, multiplier, and percentage reduced mana cost of skills. It is important that you get this percentage reduced mana cost of skills, as it will reduce the final 1 mana cost of our Spectral Throw while we have GMP in to 0. For my belt, I ended up getting an Abyss Jewel that had life and attack speed on it. Well, there you have it. An excellent and satisfying way to spend literally all of your money to make a build that is just absolutely unethical and chews up whatever you put in front of it. I had a lot of fun making this build and plan to try and min-max the gear further, as I only have really been able to play it for under a week. This will probably be the last build guide I make for this league, and my plan for the rest of the league is to focus back on general game guides, and probably shore up some of my older boss guides such as Shaper and Elder to bring them up to speed with changes that have occurred. I do plan to work on guides for the new bosses, however I would like to wait until the next patch to ensure that there won't be major changes to how they are balanced that would just invalidate my guides. So I hope you enjoyed this build and all the previous ones, and I should be back next patch with even more. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, Exile.